Hi, my name is Sean Longhurst. I'm the product lead for Conductor4SQL, and in today's video I'll be walking you through how to get up and running with our tool and install the MSI, as well as cover some of the prerequisites for our tool. Please, first things first, be sure to be watching this video in full screen and in a decent quality so you can see everything that I'm doing. So a quick overview of what exactly is Conductor4SQL. It is a tool developed by EnterpriseWorks IT to manage very large or complex environments of Microsoft SQL Server. And by large, I typically mean hundreds or thousands of instances of SQL Server that may be geographically dispersed all over the world. Also, we are building connectors for other database technologies, so please contact us if you want more information on that. And also, you don't necessarily need a large or complex environment for SQL Server for our tool. We've got some great features such as built-in SQL auditing and reporting and data synchronization that you may use even on a smaller environment of SQL Server. So let's first cover some prerequisites. Some basic terminology that I'm going to be using is I'm going to be speaking about a central instance or a master instance of SQL Server and client instances. Now, what you do is you install Conductor4SQL, the tool, on one central instance of SQL Server that can communicate to all your other instances of SQL Server out there. And then you will run our tool on top of that instance and administer or maintain or do whatever you want with the rest of your SQL environment. The client instances of SQL Server are all the other instances you control with our tool. So the first thing you're going to be doing is installing our MSI on that central instance of SQL Server, and there are a few prerequisites. Firstly, you must be running Windows Server 2008 R2 64-bit or any higher edition. You must be running Microsoft SQL Server 2008 R2 Standard Edition and anything upwards. We do recommend a clean installation of SQL Server for Conductor4SQL, but if you're trying our trial version and you want to install it on a dev instance or something else, that's fine as long as it meets all these requirements. Also, this central instance of SQL Server must be the default instance, not a named instance. But this is only a restriction on the one central instance, not on the rest of your SQL Server environment. We support named instances, default instances, and many instances on a single server as well. You're going to need the .NET Framework 4.5, and please make sure that's installed. The SQL Service account must be running as local system. And your central Microsoft SQL Server instance, as I mentioned, needs network connectivity to all those other instances of SQL Server. And you're going to need Windows or SQL credentials that have sysadmin rights to that central instance of SQL Server when you do the installation. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump over to a server with all those prerequisites. As you can see, I've got Management Studio open here. On the top left, you can see that the version of SQL is higher than the one we recommend, so that's fine. You can see here that the SQL Server service account is running as local system, so that's fine as well. You'll see that the Windows edition is at least Server 2008 R2, so that's good. And lastly, you can see that the .NET Framework 4.5 is installed. So please be sure that all these prerequisites are met before you install our MSI. So next, as you can see there is the Conductor4SQL MSI. You would have been able to download this from our website or you've purchased the product. So it's a pretty simple install. Just double click on the MSI. Obviously click next on the first screen. There's our end user license agreement. Hopefully you'll all say I agree. Click next. Here we have just a high level overview of the prerequisites, just stipulating the Windows .NET Framework and the SQL Server edition that you must be running. There's also a link to this video in that page as well. Next, you just choose the directory that you wish to install Conductor4SQL on. And you just click next, and it will install Conductor4SQL, and that's as simple as that. Once you've done that, there will be an icon on your desktop. Also, you can run Conductor4SQL from the start menu as you normally would. You can see our icon in the top left there. So the first thing, now that Conductor is installed, is you need to point it to that central instance of SQL Server. So launch Conductor for SQL by double-clicking on the icon. You see there that it wants to connect to the central server. We have not installed one yet, so what you will need to do is click on Options, and there you get the option to install a new central server, and just click on that. Now, this is where you'll be entering all the details of this central instance of SQL Server. So first of all, we need the server name of SQL or the IP. Please put the proper server name in here. We recommend rather not using localhost. So in my environment, that is the name of the SQL Server instance, which is the default instance on this actual Windows box. Next, you need to choose Windows or SQL Server authentication. So this must be an account that has sysadmin permissions on that instance of SQL. I'm going to use SQL Server authentication, and I'm going to use the good old SA account. The next box is a port number. Now, this instance of central instance of SQL Server is going to communicate with the rest of your SQL and server environment through a certain port. We default this to port 4321. Please make sure that your firewalls are turned off, or either that your firewalls allow traffic over this port. If you want to use a different port or allow traffic via another port, you can just it's configurable. You can enter that port number here. We defaulted to 4321, and this is generally an available port. So please make sure that your firewalls are either turned off or that you're allowing traffic over this port. Then we will need the Windows credentials as well on the server, because we will do some file system based operations during the central server install. So I'm going to enter those. These should preferably be administrator credentials, or they should at least be local system administrator credentials. Test the connection. Okay, it's successful. Now I'm going to go ahead and install. Many things happen here during our install process. If you get any errors during this install or any little red lights, please contact support@conductorforsql.com. And we will help you immediately to get your issue resolved. So the central server is now installed. So if you go back to Management Studio, you will see there's a new database on that instance of SQL called SyncWorks. This is our Conductor for SQL system database. So it's been successfully installed. The next thing you want to do is actually launch the user interface. So I'm going to launch the icon again, just so you see it from the beginning. I'm going to click on the Conductor for SQL icon. I'm going to enter the central server name, which is the one we just installed. I'm going to use SQL authentication and say OK. The Conductor for SQL user interface opens. There's just a little notification there. I'm running the trial version. We just let you know how many days of your trial version are left. Also, the various links to videos, as well as support and information emails for Conductor for SQL, should you wish to contact us for any reason. I'm going to close that. To launch the central user interface, you click that little magnifying glass next to the central server name. But first, we are going to go and install a client. So what this will do is we're now actually going to install our first instance of SQL Server that we're going to control or administer with Conductor for SQL. So all I did there, in case you didn't see, I'm going to do it again. I'll click on File, and click on Add a Client. This is typically where you're going to add tens or hundreds of instances of SQL Server that you want to control using our tool. There's also a lower option below called the bulk installer, which allows you to install many clients very quickly, and that'll be covered in another video. So I'm going to click Add Client. So I'm going to put in the name of another instance of SQL Server that I want to control. I'm going to be covering all these install options in more detail in another video. This is asking me if it's a reinstall. No, this is not. It's the first one I'm installing. There might be situations where you'll be uninstalling and reinstalling clients, for example, where there's hardware failures and the server gets reloaded or something like that. I'm going to use SQL Server Authentication. Now, these must be Windows or SQL credentials that have sysadmin rights on that other instance of SQL that you're installing as the client. So I'm going to use SA again. Once again, the port number. This is configurable. Once again, please make sure that any firewalls between the central instance of SQL and these other instances of SQL allows traffic both ways over this port, or you can still specify a different port if you like. You can add this instance to a grouping of instances of SQL, which we'll also cover later in a later video. So you can add those on the fly as well. So I'm going to go test connection, successful. I'm going to go install. We do some prerequisites checks there, which we've done. When it comes to the client instances of Conductor for SQL, we pretty much, the only really prerequisite is that it must be running SQL Server 2005, Service Pack 3 upwards, and it can be anything from SQL Express. Also, it must be running mixed mode authentication. So once our pre-install checks are passed, remember now we're installing a client, not central. We've done that already. I'm going to say start, and we are going to install Conductor. It's very lightweight. What's nice to notice here is that nobody needs to go to that other instance of SQL. For example, your other instance of SQL Server could be geographically dispersed. They could be instances of SQL Express, for instance, that are running on a point of sale system at all your branches across the country, something like that. So no one needs to go to those sites. You can install them right here from your one central instance of SQL, whether it be a data center or a head office, as long as they've got network connectivity. So that's been successful. Now, when I click the little icon next to the central, our user interface will launch. This is a little dashboard. This will be covered also in a later video. If I go to the menu option, Central Client Overview, you can see the first instance of SQL that we've installed. And what I would do if I were you guys, first things first is go ahead and install the central server. Go and install quite a nice number of other instances of SQL Server you want to control with our tool. It can be 10 or 20 or 100 if you like. And then you can dive into the other features through our tool that you can start doing really powerful things with your SQL environment. And those are covered in later videos. And thank you very much. Once again, if you have any technical queries or require any assistance, you can contact those email addresses that I spoke of earlier on.